Hi everybody, it's Jason with the Yahoo and the Torah YouTube channel, and I also have with me Cade, I also have with me Jade, and we are doing something a little different than what we've done before. And we're going to read over this, Why Do We Observe the Passover? It's written by Brother Todd D. Bennett from ShemaYisrael.net. If you have not seen his page, website, and his writings, I would definitely read them. He is extremely astute on history of Yisrael. He has been over to Yisrael many times, and so this is a very good write-up. The Passover is a very special appointed time known as Pesach in Hebrew. Most associate this meal with the exodus of the children of Yisrael from Egypt in 1437 BCE. To be certain, the exodus from Egypt was a dramatic event when each Hebrew household or a collection of families slaughtered a lamb or goat. The blood of the animal was marked on the lintel and the two doorposts of the house with hyssop that has been dipped in the blood. The occupants of the house then partook of a meal consisting of the sacrifice along with the other specified ingredients. By participating in this sacrificial covenant meal, those occupants were protected from the 10th and final plague rendered upon Egypt, the death of the firstborn. On the night of the Passover meal, no one was to go out of their homes until morning, lest they fall outside the covering of the blood. The Passover occurs at night, and the flesh of the sacrifice is specifically commanded to be eaten on that night, the night of the 14th day. The Passover in Egypt was unique, as the lambs or goats were slaughtered by the individuals at their homes. Thereafter, when people participated in the Passover, they were required to slaughter their sacrifices at a single place, the house of Elohim. You may not sacrifice the Passover within any of your gates, which Yahuwah your Elohim gives you, but at the place where Yahuwah your Elohim chooses to make his name abide. There you shall sacrifice the Passover at twilight, at the going down of the sun, at the time you came out of Egypt. Deuteronomy 16, 5-6. Notice this emphasis not only on the location, but also the specific information concerning the time. It is to occur at twilight. That time is referred to as the going down of the sun. The Hebrew word referring to the movement of the sun is bao. It means go. In other words, the sun is gone. It is past the horizon. This would be the time of the sunset, referred to as evening. It begins a new day. We can see that even clearer in another passage. Now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Yisrael shall kill it at twilight. Exodus 12:6. The people were to select a lamb on day 10 of month 1 and keep it until the 14th day. The Hebrew word translated as until is ad and means as far as. So the people would keep the sacrifice until the 14th day, at which time they would slaughter the lamb. They would not wait until the 14th was almost over. If they did that, they would not be observing the Passover on day 14, but rather on day 15. This would not be proper, since the Torah specifically provides that the Passover is at evening on day 14. In order to participate in this meal, all males need to be circumcised. That is because it was directly connected to the covenant made with Abraham. It is traditionally understood that Passover was when YHWH was born, as well as the time when Abraham took YHWH to sacrifice him on the mountain of Moriah. YHWH was the promised son and the pattern for the Lamb of Elohim. He was the first seed of Abraham that passed through the cuttings of the covenant circumcision that was etched into his body. Of course, the connection with circumcision is profound in the timing as well. The circumcision of the males was to occur on the 8th day after birth. The Passover was the first day in an 8th-day process involving the 7-day feast of unleavened bread. The Passover consisted on all day 14, prior to the beginning of the day 15 feast. It was an observance that culminated with a covenant meal and is intended for those who are the first fruits, known as Bikuri. They were the priests of their families according to the Melchizedek line, and in the future they will serve under Messiah. The observance reminded those in the covenant that Yahuwah would provide a lamb to protect the firstborn sons, just as Yahuwah had provided the ram in the place of Abraham's son YHWH. It revealed the door to the covenant path and was the entrance point for all who would walk on that path. There were some specific instructions concerning how the Passover was to begin at twilight on day 14, day by the slaughtering of an animal. The time often referred to as twilight is ben ha-berim. In the Hebrew text, it also translated as between the evenings, which is really quite vague when we consider that the time between the two evenings is actually a full day. This seemingly vague description of time in the English has caused some confusion concerning the exact time when the sacrifice is to be killed and when the meal is to be eaten. Does it occur at the beginning of day 14, right after sunset, on day 13, or does it occur at the end of day 14, around sunset, leading to day 15? In order to clear up on the timing, it must first be understood what constitutes a day. We know from creation that day begins at the evening. A day essentially involves two parts. the dark part called the night, and the light called the day. These two periods are stitched together at two different points, the evening and the morning. This was the aptly described on day one of creation when night and day became one, which is echad in Hebrew. The Hebrew word echad actually means unified. So the opposing forces of dark and light became one, and the 2 points that united them were given specific descriptions, evening and morning. The Hebrew word for evening is ereb, and the Hebrew word for morning is boker. Contrary to the Gregorian calendar, that reckons a day beginning at midnight, the evening is the beginning of the day, and it transitions from the previous day into night. Therefore, a new day begins after sunset. The morning is the opposite of the evening, and it marks the beginning of the time of light called day. These are the 2 points in a unified day that divide the day from the night. The evening is the time that separates one day from another. Therefore, a day begins at the evening and progresses through the night to morning, and then through the light of day to sunset. The evening and the morning are very significant, and throughout the scriptures, we repeatedly read about important events occurring at these times. In fact, after Israel was delivered from Egypt, YHWH prescribed specific sacrifices to occur at these times. Now, this is what you shall offer on the altar: 2 lambs of the first year, day by day, continually. 1 lamb you shall offer in the morning, and the other lamb you shall offer at twilight. With one lamb shall be 1/10 of an ephah of flour mixed with 1/4 of a hin of pressed oil, and 1/4 of a hin of wine as a drink offering. And the other lamb you shall offer at twilight, and you shall offer it with grain offering and the drink offering as in the morning, for a sweet aroma, an offering made by fire to YHWH. This shall be a continual burnt offering throughout your generations at the door of the tabernacle of meeting before YHWH, where I will meet you to speak with you. Exodus 29:38 through 42. Notice that this continual offering involves a lamb twice a day, which with each lamb is a meal, unleavened bread and wine. This sacrifice is specifically associated with a door, as was the Passover. Therefore, the association of this daily sacrifice with the Passover cannot be ignored, especially when examining the times of the sacrifice. Particular to this discussion in the timing of the daily evening sacrifice, which occurs at twilight, Hebrew scholars agree that the bin har abayim is properly translated as twilight, and it also means dusk. It is a time that occurs after sunset when the light of the sun is diminishing. It begins at sunset and concludes with darkness. Now, traditions of men change this time by expanding it to prior to the sunset as the sun is descending in the sky. This has caused even greater confusion for people, but the original intent of the Torah is clear. The 2 sacrifices were to occur at the 2 points that unified the day, immediately after sunrise and immediately after sunset. It was a reminder every day that the one represented by the Passover lamb who opened the door to the covenant was the same one who brought order to the universe through creation. With the time of the sacrifice established, it is now important to examine how the Passover is actually sacrificed in order to comply with the Torah. The scriptures specifically provide that all the ordinances of the Passover are to occur on day 14. Let the children of Yisrael keep the Passover at the appointed time. On the 14th day of this month at twilight you shall keep it at its appointed time. According to all its rites and ceremonies you shall keep it. Numbers 9:2 through 3. All the rites and ceremonies of the Passover include the slaughterings to the disposal of the remains before morning. They were to be carried out on day 14 of month 1. This passage alone should quell any dispute concerning this matter, because there is no way to satisfy this commandment if you saw the slaughter of the sacrifice on the afternoon of day 14. There is only 1 twilight each day, and that occurs at the beginning of the day, at evening followed by the night. The Passover involves not only the killing, but also the cooking, eating, and disposal of the remains, and that must occur on day 14. On the 14th day of the first month, at twilight is YHWH's Passover, Leviticus 23:5. All of the ordinances of Passover must occur during the portion of day 14 known as night. It must be slaughtered, eaten, and then burned before the morning on day 14. No one is to leave their homes before morning. So clearly the meal is to occur during the night of the 14th and continue until the morning. Passover is actually considered to be a watch night, when people stay up and keep vigil, just as the Messiah did as the night before his death on Passover day. This was the time when the firstborn in Egypt were either being killed or they were being protected by the blood of the lamb that had been ingested during the Passover. The primary aspects of the Passover occur in the darkness. That is the message of the Passover: deliverance from death and darkness that leads to light and life. At the Last Supper, which was clearly a Passover meal, the Messiah told his disciples that the bread symbolized his flesh and the wine represented his blood. He was telling people that his death would be the fulfillment of the Passover, and he told them that from that point onward, when they celebrated future Passover meals, to do this in remembrance of me. So clearly, the twilight when the Passover sacrifice must occur after sunset following day 13. This is the evening beginning day 14. The meal will then be eaten in the night of the 14th, and any uneaten lamb must be burned before the morning of day 14. It was after the devastation of the night that all of Egypt and the Israelites exited their homes. While the Egyptians buried their dead, the Israelites plundered Egypt and marched out as a conquering army. It was later, after sunset on day 15, that the Israelites began their trek out of Egypt under the light of the full moon. This was a high Shabbat, known as the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now, this is very straightforward, but it has been confused in both Christian and Jewish circles. We can see from the history that Christians influenced by Rome moved their date, what is known as the Quartodeciman controversy. The Jews also merged the 14th and the 15th day together by sacrificing the Passover at the end of day 14 and holding the Passover on day 15. Nevertheless, that tradition did not occur until after the death of the Messiah. In fact, there is no reason to believe that when Messiah died, Yisrael was observing the Passover any other time than day 14th of month 1. To do otherwise would have been a clear violation of Torah, and no doubt Messiah would have commanded us on that. The Passover should be kept at the correct time, just as we keep all appointed times, because the Torah says to observe the words. For it is not a futile thing for you, it is your life. If the patterns of the Scriptures are lessons for future generations, it is possible a future Passover might involve life or death. If the Israelites had ignored the instruction of Moshe and followed the traditions later established by the Christians and Rabbinitic Jews, they would have observed the Passover one day late, and that would have resulted in the death of all the firstborn. The firstborn in Egypt were the ones who were the priests and of their clans and tribes. They would have been the ones conducting the sacrifices, and therefore their lives were on the line if they failed to properly observe the commandment. The Passover is all about the Messiah, the Lamb of Elohim. He died on Passover Day after instituting the renewed covenant during the Passover meal. This all occurred on Passover Day, day 14, not day 15, which is the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, a high Shabbat. There are those who try to impose tradition and ascribe the death of Yahushua at the same time as the traditional Passover sacrifice. This is not only inaccurate, it is impossible. For one, he needed to be alive during the Passover in order to renew the covenant at the right time. He later died on Passover Day at 3 o'clock p.m. He clearly did not die at twilight when the Passover lamb was to be sacrificed. Those who believe that the Messiah had to die at the exact time as the Passover sacrifice attempt to attribute the slaughter of those lambs precisely to the execution of Yahushua, but his death was clearly not the same as those lambs. He was crucified by the Romans. He was not slaughtered at the threshold of the house. His blood was not smeared on people's doors, nor was his flesh eaten by the people. His body was not burned before sunrise. It is a pattern, not a precise fulfillment. People who participate in these scriptural acrobatics are ignoring the express scriptures that indicate that Yahushua told them to prepare the Passover so that he could conduct the Passover with his disciples, which he did, in fact, do. They are also missing the point of the meal. Yahushua was the firstborn of Elohim. He was the high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. As such, he was not of the Levitic priesthood, nor was his sacrifice confined to the temple. His death did not need to occur in the temple, nor did it need to coincide with any particular sacrifice a Levitic priest may have been offering at 3 o'clock p.m., especially since that was not even twilight. He was a different priest in a different priesthood, operating in another temple. Nothing in the New Testament account of the Last Supper of the death of Messiah changed the clear commandments in the Torah concerning the Passover. It is typical for Christians to interpret the scriptures backwards, through the lens of the New Testament, but that is not the proper way to interpret the Torah. The bottom line is that the true Passover was and remains on day 14. It begins after the sunset following day 13 of month 1 and continues through the sunset, marking the end of day 14th of month 1. The duration of this important day is confirmed by another very important appointed time involving the shedding of blood for a covering, namely Yom Kippur. We know that Yom Kippur occurs on day 10 of month 7. Here's the commandment concerning keeping this day. It shall be to you a Sabbath of solemn rest, and you shall afflict your souls. On the 9th day of the month at evening, from evening to evening, you shall celebrate your Sabbath. Leviticus 23:32. From this passage, we can clearly see that an appointed time that involves a day is reckoning from evening to evening. In other words, it is a full cycle that begins and ends at evening. That brings out another issue concerning the evening. The word erev derives its meaning from mix and weaving. The word acknowledges that it is a time of when day and night are woven together, and that process involves the mixing of day and night. Because this weaving and mixing is a process, the ancients developed the notion of 3 erevs to delineate the different aspects of the evening period. The first erev was at sunset. The second Erev was during twilight, and the third Erev was when total darkness arrived. That is when the tradition of sighting 3 stars came to distinguish twilight from total darkness. It was the distinction of different evenings within the general time of evening between sunset and total darkness. Now, it doesn't take a biblical scholar to recognize these differences as the day transitions to night. We all observe these distinctions, especially when we're looking to sight the renewed moon each month. With this understanding, it is very easy to grasp the notion of between the evenings. It is referring to that second Erev, known as twilight, that fell between the first and third Erev. So the day begins with the first Erev, sunset, and the slaughterings of the Passover sacrifice would occur after the first Erev and before complete darkness, the third Erev. That is between the evenings. If you wait until day 14th, you will actually be celebrating the Passover on day 15, which is the first day of the first of unleavened bread, not the Passover. This is an irrefutable fact, and anyone teaching that the Passover occurs at the end of day 14 is teaching a lie based upon traditions of men. The Messiah specifically stated what would happen to these individuals. If you observe the Passover at the end of day 14 instead of the beginning of day 14, then you are celebrating the Passover on the wrong day at the wrong time. It is a violation of the Torah and is therefore practicing lawlessness. If a person is found to be practicing lawlessness in that day, as described by Matthew 7:21 through 23, the consequences will be eternal. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Okay, there we go, guys. And we are now on, we celebrated our Passover last night. We had a little tiny, itty bitty, tiny little piece of lamb. It cost us $30, and it looked like the size of a hamburger. It literally looked like the size of a hamburger. And it was eaten in haste. It was completely eaten in haste. Guys, what do you think? Where are we at with this?
So, I want to note is if you missed last night's Passover on the wrong day, you do get a chance to do it in the second month.
Yeah, and there is another time, right? And so there were conditions that if you do miss the Passover and you guys did not celebrate it last night, that there were times when people were unclean or they were not around or they could not do what they were doing here. And so this is a ceremony that everybody needs to partake in. This is something that is a Kingdom Road ceremony. This is not something that deals with Easter bunnies or Easter eggs or anything like this. This is a set apart appointed time that our Creator has said to keep. And so here we are. And so hopefully this helps some of you guys figure this out. And we hope that you guys have a wonderful Passover, a wonderful Pesach, and I guess that is it.
All right.
So much love from everyone here at Boss Clan. Happy Passover.
All right. Shalom.